Welcome, everyone, and welcome to the Foundation's The Business Program. I'm Stacey Wilson Hunt. Before we speak to our guest today, I wanted to let you know that the Foundation has set up a COVID relief fund to support the thousands of union performers who are going through some tough times. Since March, thanks to your donations, the Foundation has given over $6.1 million in emergency aid to more than 6,000 performers and their families. If you are a SAG-AFTRA member and need help, please ask. And if you can help, please give. Information can be found in the description of this video. Thank you in advance for your support. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce directors and brothers, Joe and Anthony Russo. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you both today?
Good. How are you?
Thank you.
Doing well. And I think you can see there's a lot of enthusiasm. And I see someone from Cleveland has already given you a shout out. So hello from that person. Oh, she's waving right there. And this is one of those times where you can say, hello, Cleveland, right?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So before we talk about Cherry, which is a really wonderful and very powerful film, which is going to start streaming via Apple on February 26th, I do want to talk about Cleveland and your childhood and your early seeds of inspiration. And I wanted to know, were you those Spielberg kids with the Super 8 in the backyard? When were the seeds of this planted for you in terms of wanting to make films? Maybe start with Joe.
I mean, we were not. We were academics. We came at film academically. We studied it. Certainly there was more of a cultural appreciation for it when we were younger. And then as we got into our high school years, we discovered the Cleveland Cinematheque, which was an amazing art house theater in town. And Anthony and I got into foreign film, art house films, independent cinema. And it was something that we would discuss with each other with great passion. And I think that's where our relationship as partners started, was as filmmaking partners, was academically discussing films that we'd watched that we loved, quoting them, talking about the themes, talking about the performances, talking about the use of camera. So when I was getting an MFA in acting at Case Western in Cleveland. Anth was getting a law degree, and Sundance was turning into this sort of lottery ticket for independent filmmakers. Steven Soderbergh has started a frenzy where you could be discovered out of obscurity in some small corner of the U.S. Or the world, and be thrust into the spotlight and gain a career in Hollywood. And we got bit by that bug and made a very small independent movie in Cleveland, using our family and friends as cast and crew. And we spent.
And this was Pieces, correct? This was your film Pieces? Mm-hmm.
Right. About $30,000 on that film, went to the Slam Dance Film Festival with it, and got subsequently discovered by Steven Soderbergh, who was probably the only person who would have responded to that movie because it was highly experimental, nonlinear in structure, very stylish film, and was not really a mainstream piece of work. And so we were very fortunate that he was in the theater and saw the movie.
Well, and he was notoriously nervous, of course, so nervous when he showed Sex, Lies, and Videotape, and wondered if anyone was going to like it. So I'm sure he knew exactly how you felt to be showing, whether it was at the Egyptian or whatever theater you showed. He knew exactly the anxiety that you had, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it was again, as an experimental film and being at a festival, I think half the audience walked out about halfway through the movie. And those who enjoyed the film stayed, and Soderbergh happened to be, in that crowd that stayed. So we've never followed a very traditional path as filmmakers, including the work that we did early in our careers, and then where that led us to, and how we found our way into commercial filmmaking, because we certainly didn't start there.
I love that. And Anthony, when you and your brother I would say best term is geek out over film, was it kind of David Lynch Eraserhead? Was it Scorsese? Who were the people who were sort of blowing your mind at the time, and you thought, that's kind of what we want to do, but we want to build on that and do something else?
Certainly Eraserhead and Scorsese were sort of favorites.
I have a feeling.
Yeah. Nice call. Yeah, we grew up, it's interesting. We had sort of this split personality growing up. We loved the multiplex. So we loved the big commercial films, But like Joe said, we also had access to the Cleveland Cinematheque, this amazing resource for global cinema, art house cinema, historical cinema. So we just geeked out on everything. Also, our dad, like we would watch TV, the Bowery Boys with our dad on the Late Show. It was like we really ran the spectrum of kind of everything cinema, and I think you can kind of see that in our careers. We've had quite a range in terms of what we've done, from like small indie movies to big sort of studio films to television, comedy, drama. We shoot commercials. We love the entire spectrum of what you can do with cinema as filmmakers. And I think that comes from the fact that we sort of love the entire spectrum of what's been done with the moving image by people throughout time in different formats. And so, yeah, it's hard to, as far as influences go, sometimes it's hard to talk about because it's so wide ranging. But, I would say, if I had to pick some favorites, certainly Scorsese's one of them. Francois Truffaut's another one. His film Shoot the Piano Player was a very big influence on the first movie we ever tried to make. But, I would say all of the above.
It's a lot to choose from. And Steven Soderbergh himself, he was a game-changing artist for me and remains that way. And
Absolutely.
So because this is an audience of people who are looking for possibly their big break, they're looking for representation, I always want to talk about how those huge milestones happen. So after Pieces, were you immediately signed by an agency? Were you guys that people wanted to work with, or did you have a few more years to work before you started to get offers?
We were not. No, it took us quite a bit of work after to detail the story so everyone understands, what's required. Soderbergh called us about a week after the festival. No one else responded. We're like, okay, well, I guess,
Wow.
really cut out for the film business. And we got a phone call from Soderbergh who said, let's go sit and have a conversation. I want to talk to you guys about what you want to do in the business. We went to lunch with him at a place called Versailles on Venice Boulevard. And he detailed to us the sort of predicament he was in his career at that time. He had made Sex Lies. It was a huge critical success. And then he had made several box office flops and some very experimental movies that were
Kafka too, probably around that time, right?
Yeah, films that were controversial with critics. They were loved or hated. Steven's always been someone who just really doesn't care about external opinions. But he said, I'm at this point in my career where I can't get my movies made.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I need to go make this movie called Out of Sight at Universal. And it's a genre film. And I'm going to work with this actor named George Clooney. And Clooney was coming off of ER at the time. This was not, George Clooney as everyone knows him. This was George Clooney, the television star. And, we were two sort of punks from Cleveland who fancied themselves, extreme independent, filmmakers. And our first response to Soderbergh was, why would you do that? And he thoughtfully explained it to us. And then he let us come to set and visit. And he took us under his wing and showed us that it's called show business for a reason. There is a component to making movies where they have to return value for the investors. Steven had this great philosophy that you do one for them and one for you. And what he meant by that is leverage your brand commercially, show that you can create value for companies so that people will give you money to make your personal films. But if all you're going to do is make personal films, you're probably going to crash out at some point and not be able to find, money for your risky endeavors. And that was eye-opening to us.
That's such a brilliant insight too, and so helpful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so I would encourage that if one, to make a 5-year plan for yourself. Where do you want to be in 5 years? 2, how are you going to get there? What are you going to do? We didn't get representation right away. It took us another 3 or 4 years after that. We had to write 2 screenplays to get representation. And then it took us, after Soderbergh and that lunch, it took us about 4 years to get another movie made. And that was working every day, sitting in Soderbergh's office in a corner with a phone next to us, making phone calls, trying to get actors attached to our movie, trying to get financing attached to the film. And it took every drop of blood in our body to do it.
So you were signed first by the WGA as writers?
Yes, I believe that's correct, right?
That's interesting.
It's perhaps not, because basically what happened, like Joe was saying, Soderbergh sat down with us and said, hey, I really liked what you did. How can I help you guys move forward? And we were like, well, we don't know. We're like, we're from Cleveland. We just made a movie. What do we do now?
Right.
So he basically said, well, if I were you guys, because we had written our first movie, he goes, I would write another film. So basically, like Joe was describing, we went into a period where it took us about 3 years. We wrote 3 screenplays over 3 years. And again, in the same way that first movie that we made, Pieces, for we made it on like micro budgeted credit card film. That was basically our film school. We learned how to make movies by just doing everything ourselves while we were making that movie. And that movie was a very experimental film. It wasn't a traditional film in any sense of the word. And it was like radically non-commercial film. So we thought, okay, well, we really love making movies and we need to be able to support ourselves making movies so we don't have to work other jobs anymore. So how do we do that? How do we make something that we can get paid for? So we started to try to teach ourselves how to write scripts. We went into a period for about 3 years where we just learned about screenwriting by reading books. We both had a little bit of film school at that point, but we were mostly working on our own and just trying to figure out a process for ourselves that worked in terms of us understanding commercial narrative structure, screenplay structure, and also what we wanted to do with it as artists. So we wrote 3 screenplays over that period, and near the end of that period, where Joe was described and we started working again with Steven, he had formed a company with George Clooney called Section 8, which was based at Warner Brothers, where they were going to make Ocean's 11 for Warner Brothers. So as a part of that deal with Warner Brothers, Steven had told them that, he didn't want to just make these huge studio films. He also wanted to bring a few smaller indie films through the system. And we were the first movie Joe and I were the first filmmakers they brought in to sort of move through that Warner Brothers system in a more independent fashion. And we basically showed Steven and his partners at that time the 3 screenplays that we had written, and Steven said that one, and it happened to be Welcome to Collinwood. And he picked it because it was the sort of most easy to produce of the 3 screenplays we had written. And since we were new filmmakers who had only worked on a shoestring budget up to that point, he very wisely said, let's bite this off next. And that was another Cleveland set story. And we went off and made that. And
so I've talked to a lot of directing teams, the Duplass brothers, and these really great guys who just did Antebellum, this very great movie with Janelle Monáe this year. And I always want to talk to people, how do you divide the duties on set? And how do your strengths complement your brother's strengths? And what are those? And I would love for your brother to start, Joe.
We don't divide duties. I mean, initially it was weird when we first started because there were very few directing teams. And in fact, there were no verified directing teams by the DGA. The Coens were the only other team, and they did not get a waiver from the DGA to co-direct. Right. So you'll note that the Coens have been, one's a producer, one's a director, and then they rotate. The Hughes brothers came out with a movie 1 year before Anthony and I decided to make a film, and they were the first ones, I believe, to get the DGA waiver. That was Menace to Society, yes? That's right, Menace to Society. So they were a bona fide Directors Guild endorsed team. And they did divide up duties, right? So Anthony and I didn't have a lot of, places that we could go to source information about how to work as a directing team. So we just looked at the Hughes brothers and said, okay, well, one of them works with camera, one of them works with actors. I was studying to be an actor. I'll take actors, you take camera. And that lasted about 2 days. And then we realized, we both like working with everyone. And so our process evolved over time. And it's really just we subscribe to something called the mastermind principle, which is the 2 minds are not doubly better than one, they're exponentially better. And so we find true value in both of us applying our minds to every choice we make rather than one of us. And I think that's where our secret sauce lies. Fascinating because we wholeheartedly reject the auteur theory. We are a duo, right? We subjugate the ego in order to work together. We're educated populace. We come from Cleveland, Ohio. We're from the industrial Midwest. We grew up watching, blockbusters, and we grew up watching art house films, and we live in some blend in the space between those two. We like compelling thematics, but we also like stories that reach people, that reach a wide audience, that affect a wide audience, and allow them to participate. We're by nature, we reject elitists. We reject anything that precludes others, either by virtue of ideology or by structure that rejects others from participating. And again, I think that's just our industrial Midwest roots, this idea that we're a collective and a community, and that you come from a place that, Cleveland was struggling when we grew up. It went bankrupt, the river caught on fire, the mayor's hair caught on fire. So we were sort of born in this city that was constantly being made fun of. And you band together as a community and you kind of all pat each other on the back and go, it's okay. It's, either Cleveland or New Jersey are considered the armpits of America. We're all right with that, and I think it really forged who we are as artists and our approach of inclusion. And so I think that applies to how Anth and I work together, and it applies to how we work with our crews. We always say best idea wins. Actors bring us incredible ideas. Grips bring us incredible ideas. The script supervisor can have an amazing idea. We don't care where it comes from as long as you're contributive and we're all working towards the same goal and collaborating together. That's the real value for us as filmmakers.
That's great. And it's still actually quite a rare perspective even today. But I do have to say or ask, did the Drew Carey show help Cleveland at all? I know that was really put it on the map.
Certainly did. Drew Carey, Harvey P. Carr.
Everything helps. Everything helps.
Yeah.
Harvey P. Carr, right. And even just his theme song, Cleveland Rocks, probably did help you. And Anthony, I'd love to know, what did you find out about yourself when you were put in these situations? Here you go from this tiny little, not use the word auteur, but auteur film with pieces. Suddenly you have a bigger budget. It's this kind of, luminary studio. You have George Clooney and I assume Grant was involved, his producing partner, Grant Heslov, Steven Soderbergh. I mean, a lot of your heroes. And suddenly you're on set and everyone's looking to you and your brother for guidance. What was the scariest part of that process for you, and how did you help each other in those moments?
Great question. So, again, our reference point several years earlier, the only film we had made prior to Welcome to Collinwood was Pieces. And Pieces, like I said, very low budget. On a heavy day, we maybe had 6 crew members, so we were very much used to a very lean focused, our mom cooked and our sister made pasta every day. That was what we ate for lunch, the crew and all. We were shooting nights, so they drop it off at midnight, and so that was
so
kind of
Italian.
So the first day of Welcome to Collinwood, yeah, it was very much so. So we're going to set on the very first day of Welcome to Collinwood. We finally made it. The budget of the movie was like $7.5 million. We're in Cleveland. Joe and I are driving to set, and we're pulling up. It's in an industrial area on the Near East Side, and we're pulling up to this factory. And all of a sudden, this area where we're shooting, as we're approaching it, there's cars all over the place. There's trucks. There's a police car. And Joe and I start to panic. We're like, what is going on here? We're shooting. We need to shoot here today. This is a disaster. Our first day of the shoot. And how did this happen? Little do we know, as we get out of the car, this is all of our crew. These are our trucks. These are our people. These are our police. We had no idea. But that's how green we were, But I have to say, we were very, I think the way we made it through Welcome to Collinwood was we were very well supported. We had amazing collaborators. We had the best producers you could ask for, and Stephen and George, every key position. Again, they knew how to protect first-time filmmakers. As producers, they surrounded us with people who weren't first timers. And that helps you sort of understand filmmaking on a larger scale. The cast was amazing. It's like an all-star indie cast at the time. So yeah, I would say that was basically it. Was just, and again, Joe and I, again, back to the fact that we work as a team, we love the process of collaboration. So when you surround us with people to collaborate with who are experienced and knowledgeable and have the right orientation in terms of how to treat others, we can thrive in that kind of an environment.
I love that. And I don't want to not have time to mention Avengers, which was 2018 Infinity War, the first superhero film to gross $2 billion at the box office. How did that sort of pinnacle moment affect what you wanted to do moving forward? And then how did Cherry fit into that? Because these are very different movies, very different scale, different messaging, different stories, but also I can see the same people directed both when I watch them.
Look, it's that lesson from Soderbergh and Clooney that one for you, one for them. We did a long one for them, not to imply that, we didn't have an amazing experience at Marvel, we did. But it afforded us the opportunity to start our own company called Agbo, where we're working with a lot of first-time filmmakers, and we're repaying that karmic debt that we owe the universe, where Soderbergh held the door open for us. We're now trying to do that for other people, for new voices, for fresh voices, for disruption. Look, I think Cherry and the Avengers both deal with very similar thematics, which is the notion that we were exploring in Infinity War and Endgame was, are you fated? Or can you alter fate through sheer force of will? And if you look at the movies, that's what they're really about. Fate wins in Infinity War, and through sheer force of will, the Avengers overturn fate. It costs you. You have to make great sacrifices to overturn fate. It costs them dearly, but they're able to do it. And so ultimately, we're espousing a hopeful point of view of the world versus a fatalistic point of view. And mind you, we're existentialists from Cleveland. So, as we get older, we embrace hope. Cherry is a movie that is about fate. Right? It's about making choices when you really don't have the life experience to make those choices. So early on in the film, Sierra Bravo plays a character named Emily, and is, from an abusive family. And when Tom Holland's character, Carrie, falls in love with her, she rejects it and runs from it. And that forces him to make a choice that he doesn't have enough life experience to make, which is, I'm going to go to war, or I'm going to sign up and enlist. Go to war. That choice costs him 15 years of his life because he comes back with PTSD. He self-medicates with opiates. He becomes an addict. He starts robbing banks. He goes to prison. So it's a complicated story in that regard. Fate is weighing over him heavily. Now, ultimately, there is a very hopeful ending to that movie, but it comes at a great cost. So I think we would argue that movie is a very modern and tragic love story where two people fall in love, have the opportunity at an incredible life, make some decisions that forever alter the course of their lives, only to return to each other 15 years later.
And it's interesting. I wouldn't have immediately seen those parallels with Avengers, but now that you say that, it's very seamless. I do want to ask Anthony, what is a movie that you would like to make next that you haven't attempted? You've done comedy, you've done television. I mean, there really aren't a lot of things you haven't done. What is the type of story, and you sort of thinking about what the Coens have done in their career, where every single movie is a different genre, a different setting, a different world. What is a world that you would like to explore next?
It's so hard to talk about these things because, we're certainly working toward making those exact movies right now. And so you don't want to really talk about them before they're ready to talk about.
Sure.
But I will say this, we do, if you look at our road as filmmakers, again, we've made movies for as little money as you can make them for as much money as you can make them for, all over the map, right? I think, that's part of our nature. We like to change things up. And the other thing we like to do is chase innovation, chase technological innovation, and chase innovations in the marketplace in terms of how people receive narrative, film narrative. And I'll give you a couple examples in that in our past, which might speak to like what we want to do next. But like when we made Arrested Development, for instance, Arrested Development was the first television show, primetime television show, scripted show on the major networks that was ever shot in digital video. And there's a very specific reason we did that. You know, Ron Howard, who was one of the producers on that show at the time, was like, you know, he basically said to Joe and I really feel like the half-hour comedy on television is dying. It's getting replaced. You know, that was during the period of the rise of reality television, and it was sort of eating up the dial. So there are all the half-hour slots that were for comedy were getting taken over by reality TV, which was cheaper to produce and getting a lot more eyeballs. So
and also, I think the multicam was dying, and shows like Scrubs on NBC were a couple single cam shows, but not a lot at that point.
Exactly. To get it even more detailed on it, you're right. The multi-cameras were getting stale. Single cameras were expensive to produce because they don't cost. You only get, if you compare a single camera half-hour comedy to an hour-long drama on television, again, in the old television model where there's commercials, the revenue you're earning on that half-hour TV show is half of what the hour-long costs. But it doesn't cost half as much to produce a single camera show as it does an hour-long show because of all the startup costs, right? So it was a very endangered species in terms of whether it could be viable in the TV space. So Ron, and his partners, David Nevins, very smartly turned to indie filmmakers. There's a whole sort of opening up to independent filmmakers at the time because HBO had just changed television with The Sopranos. So people wanted to tap into that indie film energy. So they knew Joe and I as like guerrilla filmmakers who could do something on a budget. So our whole approach to that show was like, okay, how do we reinvent what the half-hour single cam can be? And if it's getting beat to death by reality television, if you can't beat them, join them. So we came up with the whole concept to shoot that show as a documentary. And that was very innovative. And it ended up being, it was also the perfect complement creatively to what that show was and what that show could be. So I bring that up as an example in the sense that that's where we light up the most as filmmakers. Same thing with the MCU, what we were able to do with the MCU. We were able to do things as storytellers with those films that most people can't do because it was serialized storytelling. So you aren't used to going to the movie theater and getting your brain blown up at the end of a movie because, normal movies can't end that way. But when you have a serialized story that's going to live on and bring people another movie a year or so down the line, you can push them in ways that you couldn't otherwise. And we really took advantage of that through our entire 4 films through the MCU. So I would say moving forward, to get back to your question, moving forward, we are always drawn to those kinds of opportunities in storytelling where we could be most experimental and riotous with what we're doing as storytellers, and how is that being supported by the new opportunities in technology and the evolving media landscape in terms of how people receive media.
Well, and it's interesting too to think about Arrested, because obviously it didn't last that long on Fox because it was probably a little too ahead of its time. I think we can all agree it was so completely boundary breaking that it makes sense now to look back that it was probably just too much for people. And of course it found a home on Netflix after that. But it is interesting to think that even Fox being the sort of rogue network that it was, it still didn't know how to manage something this forward thinking, at least in my memory.
Yeah, that was part of the problem. Also, part of the problem was, networks were starting to crumble at that time. And so, Arrested was a very much of an indie expression for what they could do.
Very much.
The problem with the indie expression was you can make something cool and interesting that people want to watch, but it's only a smaller number of people want to watch it. So the numbers that would come to Arrested Development, while they were very passionate about the show, they were relatively small compared to their other shows. And the model couldn't sustain on their network.
Right. That's very true. Well, here's to the never nudes, because that created an indelible mark on the business. So we have a ton of questions. We will not, and I'm sorry in advance, we will not get to all these questions. So I'm just trying to see which are most relevant to our audience today. And I would like to ask this one from Andrea, which something I wanted to talk about is, what do you most look for in an actor's audition? And maybe what is something that you really wish that actors wouldn't do, or maybe you wish that they would do more of? And feel free, either of you, to weigh in.
Well, we're looking for emotional truth, whether it's a comedy or a drama. Are you being emotionally true? Do we believe the choices that you're making? And I think that's really being a great study of human behavior, and then having the right technique to process that. We work with actors who are method. We work with actors who are all technique. And you can find great actors in either category. But ultimately, what the great actors have in common is that they have an ability to convey emotional truth. They tend to take risks, and they're inventive in their choices. So if there's anything I'd encourage people to do, is just take risks, And I think that in your choices, as long as you stay grounded in reality, and you stay grounded in, as I said, this sort of this emotional truth, that what your behavior is. It can be eccentric, but is it true and is it real? And I think ultimately that's what's critical. So be a great study of people. Go sit at a coffee shop and watch people behave. Go. When the world opens back up again, go walk around at the Grove and watch people, and write down the ways that people behave, the little things that they do that are unexpected, because that's truthful behavior. They're not aware that anyone's watching them. So I would say take risks and find your emotional truth.
I love that. And who knew the Grove would serve that purpose? I would never have thought about the Grove. And next question for Anthony from Brett. Why did you decide to make Cherry a feature film as opposed to a limited series? That's a great question, because I imagine there could be a lot to mine there over many installments.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think really what it was we did like the fact that Cherry basically had this sort of Odyssean journey in his life, and that he sort of went through so many phases of his existence in a fairly compressed time period. I mean, the movie does span perhaps, I think, 18 years of his life, which is a lot. But I think there was something very appealing to us in this idea of sitting down in a single narrative and really being able to track that character through that entire 18-year arc in a single narrative. It seemed, for us, it seemed like it maximized the emotional impact of the story and sort of the experience of the story. But it's a great question, because nowadays, because TV and film are so equal now in terms of what you can do on an artistic level, there is a lot of discussion we have about does something want to be a series? Does something want to be a TV show, or a film? And it's a very interesting question. This movie, I think, again, just because it fell into that sort of framework, it seemed like that's the way we were going to get maximum emotional impact, psychological impact out of the experience.
Well, and also it's less of a time commitment, and Tom Holland can do your movie, but he may not be able to do your show.
That's an excellent point. Yeah.
He is busy with another little movie that he's shooting in Atlanta right now, I think.
It sure is.
And Jess from Hawaii has a question. How do you determine when and if it's quote unquote safe to make suggestions to a director? This is she speaking as an actor. And you two, of course, are very collaborative, but as actors, she meaning she, are often warned not to be a cook in the kitchen unless you're a star. And she says, mahalo.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for the question. I mean, look, I think you can read directors' personalities. Some are open to ideas, some aren't. Because my brother and I collaborate every day. Like I said, we're super open to ideas, because that's been our working process for 25 years. Some directors are very internal and not good at social. They don't have good social skills or good at communication. I can't tell you, when we were producing television, how many directors we supervised or executive produced that had an inability to speak to actors. It was mind-blowing. They didn't even understand the language to communicate to them. They didn't know what a beat was. They didn't know what psychological gesture was. It was shocking that they couldn't communicate on that level. So I'd say two things here. One is read the director. You'll get a good sense of their personality and how outgoing they are. A lot of directors really appreciate the actor doing the heavy lifting because they have so many things on their mind that, they can't get into the detail and the minutia of your performance. So they'll appreciate you helping them block the scene. They'll appreciate that. Others, as you probably worked with, are super detailed, and you stand here and you stand there, and they sort of limit the creativity of the actor on set. But the last thing I'll say, which I think is really important, and this is what makes all great actors great, no matter who you're working with, you have to self-direct. You have to bring that performance and understand how to bring a great performance no matter who you're working with, because you cannot rely on the director. As I said, we met many of them who had no idea how to communicate to actors. You can't rely on the director to make you great. You have to make yourself great. And because they may not have that skill set. And the best actors will do that consistently no matter who they're working with. They will always bring it.
That is so wise. Anthony, Tim Jackson would like to know if Pieces can be seen anywhere now. Can it be streamed, or is it available anywhere?
No, it's never been released. We made the movie again without any sort of knowledge of the film business whatsoever. So what we ended up doing was we used music extensively in it that we edited to very, very specifically. And the movie, I think we shot the movie for $35,000. And we ended up having, like, when all was said and done, we had $1 million of music rights in the movie. So it literally precluded the film from being releasable because nobody was going to spend that kind of film money to release that. So that movie is sitting on the shelf. Maybe we'll figure out a way to somehow get it out there someday, but it's just sitting. We had to just say goodbye to it.
Oh, so it's probably on a bootleg VHS somewhere, right?
Perhaps, yeah.
In Steven Soderbergh's basement somewhere. Dorothy would like to know.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a great question regarding the MCU. Green screen acting is a big part of the Marvel universe. How did you assist actors in dealing with this kind of imaginative leap? Which is a very great logistical question. Maybe have Joe weigh in on that.
Well, again, that's about, a level of detail that you apply when they're working in this nether space, right? They're just staring at green screens and green props. I think you have to be very detailed about what is around them. It's helpful to have paintings, matte paintings, to have artwork on set so they understand what the space looks like. And then ultimately, like working with Roland, who was a CG character in a CG environment, we would ground everything for him in emotional truths, not to keep harping on that. But this is your daughter. Here's how you feel about her. This is your other daughter. This is how you feel about her. Have you had those experiences in your own life with family members? We would try to make it very personal and very real for him. And so I think he would treat it almost like a black box experimental process for him. And so he would get lost in the other actors. And that's where he would seek his solace and his sense of reality from, was connecting to the other actors. And again, just finding that level of detail and emotional connectivity.
That's great. And Anthony, Unicorn Rose would like to know, how did you first come across the book that inspired Cherry, which began as a novel? And I think you secured the rights in 2018. Is that right? Around that time?
Yeah, we were in post. Somebody just recommended it to us. It was unpublished, but somebody in the business said, hey, I read this book that I think you guys would really respond to, because they knew the book. Again, the book is set in Cleveland, where we're from. It's set in the neighborhoods in Cleveland where we came from. So somebody just thought, oh, there might be a connection there for you guys. And that was it. We read it and it spoke to us very powerfully. Primarily it's, part of the reason it spoke to us so powerfully was because it was about the opioid crisis. And we had recently had family members struggle with and even die from that crisis. So it was something that struck us very personally. And so to find such a miraculously written book on that subject matter set in the area we grew up it was just something we felt like we had to do.
And tell me how your sister became involved in writing the script or adapting the novel, as it were.
It was very much, I think, an extension of that. Our sister is, she's a bit younger than Joe and I, but we've collaborated with her for years. In fact, she's, when we made Pieces, she's in a little scene as a 16-year-old in that film.
Aww.
But we throughout the years, she's done some acting, but primarily she has worked as a writer. And she is just, again, we've had many opportunities through the years to work with her, but I think this opportunity on Cherry was the most special and involving. And so it was an amazing experience. And again, it came very much from a shared experience of a sense of place and a sense of history and personal history. And it ended up working really well.
That's great. I love a family affair. That's always very special. And I think we only have time for one more question. And it's a great wrap-up question because it's sort of the omnipresent theme in all of our lives right now. Brian would like to know how COVID has impacted the dynamics between directors and crew, and how are you working around these necessary, very sterile environments? And how is that impacting your creative process? And either of you, feel free to weigh in.
I mean, I wouldn't, it's great question. I wouldn't say that it's impacted it dramatically. Clearly, we have to be very safe. And it is hard to communicate through a mask because, you can't read facial expression. But as far as working with the actor, I mean, when you're on a scene, the actor's unmasked, so you can still read their facial expressions. You can still get communication, physical communication from them. For us, we just have to be more articulate and specific. Safety on set is critical. We're working on a movie called The Gray Man right now with Ryan Gosling and Chris Evans. And, it's been a very slow, long process to prep the film because of the procedures that are in place. I would imagine that, as we all get vaccinated over the course of the next few months here, that we'll slowly start to see a transition back towards a traditional set, although I think it could be years before we're functioning like we used to.
Wow, really years?
I mean, years in that, I think masks are going to be an important part of safety when you're in large groups. We have variants that, we don't know if they're vaccine proof yet. I'm sure we're going to figure out how to start producing vaccines at a higher rate, at a faster rate to accommodate for these variants. But, from a safety standpoint, I think there's some value to some of the standards that have been applied during the pandemic that we can use moving forward just to protect people in general from the flu and other things that pass around a set in a closed environment.
Right. Well, hopefully we've all learned lessons too that just can keep us safe for years and years, whether or not we work in Hollywood. So I think that's a great point. And before we close, just want to make sure, Anthony, you don't feel that you didn't get a chance to ask a final question. Did you have anything else to add?
The only thing I'll add is I want to give a shout out to Brian Schaefer, who I see there. Joe and I have worked with several times. It's good to see you, Brian.
I think he wanted me to give him a shout out too.
There may be other people we've worked with, but I can't see everybody.
I've done a lot of these events the last few months. This is definitely the most robust audience participation I have seen thus far during COVID. So it speaks very highly of your reputation and also just your great work. And you're both very inspiring. And thank you for being here today.
We really appreciate it. We want to thank all of you. I mean, it is really, we've done quite a number of these, and it is lovely to see everyone on camera because usually it's just three of us sitting here talking without any interaction or reaction. And I'm sorry, I've been sort of scanning your questions as we're talking, making sure that we've answered things that are important. But there is one thing that I do want to mention that is
please do.
On here about actors making their own projects. And what I would encourage you to do is, look, you live in a time where this is a very powerful tool. And when we made our first movie, we had to get a 60mm camera. We had to buy expensive film. We had to pay a lot of money to get it developed. It was very complicated to get distribution for it. In fact, It never got distributed. But, you know, to tell the Donald Glover story one more time, Anthony and I were working as on a commercial, directing a commercial, when one of the, ad executives came up to us and said, hey, have you seen this Derek Comedy Group? It's a bunch of kids out of NYU writing comedy sketches, shooting them on an iPhone and posting them on YouTube. I said, no. He played it for me and I laughed very hard. And I said, who's the lead kid here? He is unbelievable. Like, his comic timing is incredible. And it was Donald Glover. We reached out to him and we said, look, we'd love to find something to do with you. We think you're incredibly talented. Again, just a student at NYU. And a year later, we were casting Community. There was a role for a dumb white jock, which was a role that we felt like we had seen a million times before. And we said, you know what, I bet Donald Glover could do something really inventive with this part. We called him, he auditioned, he killed it, and the rest is history. So you have the opportunity to put yourself on camera very cheaply and to self-distribute on YouTube. I would take advantage of it.
That's so great. And now TikTok, love it or hate it, it's a great way to make an impact too. So people have a lot of options. And again, I wanted to thank you both. And to recap, Cherry is available starting February 26th. And we hope everyone has a chance to see the film. It is really wonderful. And Tom's performance is just excellent. So thank you for joining us. And really, thank you to everyone tuning in. These are really, honestly, the best questions and most engaged audience I've seen in a very long time. So I think it speaks highly of everyone here.
Yeah, Stacey, thank you. And you did bring up a great point, and I'll put a button on this. TikTok. Yes. I know a lot of top casting directors who are sending me TikToks and saying, have you seen this person? Oh my God, aren't they hilarious? Look at how talented this person is. I mean, I'm getting tons of them. So another great format for self-distribution.
It's great. There can never be enough. Well, thank you, gentlemen, and best of luck with Cherry. I hope everyone gets a chance to see it. It's really great. And stay safe, please.
Thank you. And thank you, Stacey.
Thank you. And take care, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.